Big disclaimer, if you have not played Echoes of the Eye, I am about to spoil the living hell out of it. Get out of here and play Outer Wilds if you haven't already.
Alright, get lost, all of you. You're fired. Go on, scram, get out of here, you moochers. That's right, keep moving.
You know what? Yeah.
Except you stay.
Outer Wilds. Where do I begin with this game? This is one of my favorite games of all time, and the thing for which my love of's kicked off this whole channel. It's just such a special game. It manages to create a sense of wonder that no other game has ever been able to quite match, setting forth such an interesting world for you to become intimate with and explore to your heart's content. It sets up an absolutely perfect web of mysteries to untangle by putting your knowledge of the universe to the test to solve expertly designed puzzles with solutions that were there the whole time. And it manages to tell an absolutely perfect story, both of the tragedy of people that are long gone when you arrive, and the new tragedy of your universe meeting its end, but being able to find hope in sacrificing it to bring something new. Topped off with how everything is so perfectly paced, with you discovering it all at the pace you want to, and in whatever order, making a perfectly personalized experience. It's a game that stuck with me ever since I first played it, and I still can't stop thinking about this game. This game is just so different from anything else on the scene. The experience Outer Wilds gives truly cannot be replicated, even by playing it a second time. Outer Wilds is just a game where you want more of it, but just can't have that due to the nature of how unique it is. God knows I felt that emptiness and longing for more after finishing it, and that's why the news of potential DLC had me absolutely fanatic. The announcement of the DLC was actually strange, as the DLC was sort of leaked way before it was supposed to be shown off for real, as the entry for it in Steam was found before Annapurna or Mobius had anything at all. The strangest continued with everyone collectively wondering how the hell a DLC would work for something like Outer Wilds. But we had to wait for more details till the day of the dev stream, which was awesome, and followed the Summer Games Fest, which blew. Though, this didn't really give any info, but we got a promise for more info in a month at Annapurna Interactive Showcase. Eventually, the day rolled around, and we finally got a greater look at the DLC, and it looks so promising. Obviously, Mobius still didn't reveal much at all in terms of real details, because that's just how Outer Wilds works, but we had it fully promised now. And flash forward to now as the DLC is out, and my god, is it something special just like Outer Wilds was originally. It masterfully integrates itself into the main game, feeling like something that was really there the whole time, and truly completes Outer Wilds' story. The main idea of the DLC is a brand new location in the solar system that you can only discover thanks to the new satellite set up by Outer Wilds Ventures. This new location of the Stranger is unlike anything seen before in Outer Wilds, and is the setting for the story of its inhabitants. You'll go through the massive river ring world they built to discover how they arrived, what they did, and by venturing into dark places you don't belong, what they wanted to hide. This DLC is absolutely incredible for all the reasons I just listed, so if you haven't played it yet and didn't hear me at the start of the video, just go play the thing. It's absolutely worth it. But without further delay, let's delve into how this is a perfect DLC for a perfect game. Outer Wilds was already a game that blew me away with its visual design. The game just has such a lovely art style and aesthetic going for it, The worlds it showed were just brimming with uniqueness and sheer beauty, from the intense yet serene Giant's Deep, to the horrifying silence of Dark Bramble, to the feeling of safety upon Timber Hearth. Each planet managed to stick out in its own way, with a true sense of wonder, and it was already amazing that it managed to feel so different, even with a relatively smaller amount of places to explore. So the fact that they managed to pull it off again to an even greater degree is just mind-blowing to me. This DLC managed to capture a completely new feeling compared to anything in the base game. The Stranger makes for an amazing new location to explore that gives so many different emotions as you explore through it. First off, this location was just such a shock to the senses. The opening to get to this location is just absolutely perfect framing. As you go through the familiar Hearthian locations with the radio tower and satellite, to see the truly alien eclipse. The alien feeling only increases as you actually approach it, mind racing with ideas as to what it could be. Then you finally arrive, in a pretty disorienting way, and have absolutely no clue what you're looking at. But you manage to eye one little spot to fly into, and the weirdness only escalates as you see ships. Not Hearthian or Nomai ships, but something else. This only gets confirmed as you see some writing that your translator cannot make sense of. At this point, most players are on the edge of their seat, because you're in the deep end of the unknown. Who are these new people? Are they alive? Are they dead? Are they hostile? Without any other options, you move forward and make use of the only control you can, and then you get probably the last thing you ever would have expected from a location like this. Instead of a cold, dead location like the entrance might make you assume, you're given an absolutely jaw-dropping ring world with this massive river and filled to the brim with life. This river area is just so magical to explore, as it brings back that familiar feeling of exploring a massive new world. The area itself is also stunning with Outer Wilds' great art style, and how the areas manage to vary themselves with interesting set pieces. But it's not all natural, as there's also plenty of settlements here. Settlements that feel completely different from the architecture of either the Hearthians or Nomai. They give strange, conflicting emotions, as they are similar to Hearthian and can feel somewhat familiar, but there's just enough differences to feel horribly alien. Exploring these places feels like you're not supposed to be here. Like the people living here are just out of the home and might come back any moment. It leaves the player with the hanging question of where the heck these people are. And speaking of the people, this place already leaves you with a bit of dread thanks to what the people left behind. The portraits do not do any favors to make them look approachable, and the slides, which we'll get to more later, also don't help. But speaking of the slides, the art for these is just so wonderful looking. They're just really great illustrations that manage to keep that mix of both wonder and also dread. I'm bad at describing the art stuff in games, so just, God, these things look great with their art. Along with the settlements and river, there's also a few areas that bring back that cold feeling of the entrance, as you step into areas that explain the artificial nature of this craft, or what's going on with the people. The DLC goes further than just cold isolation and dread though, as you'll begin to piece together things with the shrines, and you'll finally discover where the people went. This is where the DLC dips more into horror than base Outer Wilds ever did. The sight of the people here dead and lifeless by the fire made my heart sink. You've seen Nomai skeletons everywhere, but this hits different. It only gets worse as you piece together more puzzles, and doze by the fire to see the room now empty. And when you step outside, this is the other world you'll be exploring. A darkened version of the ring world that turns those locations from strange but still magical and that you want to explore to terrifying yet beautiful places that you don't want to step foot into at first. These locations crank up the feeling of not belonging there to 11, as these places don't feel abandoned at all, as you really do feel like someone could pop out at any moment. And oh boy, they can. You get to feel the stranger's presence here, whether it be the subtle footsteps of them in the distance, or seeing them yourself, whether up close or thankfully at a distance. You feel like an intruder during these segments, and your only thought is gonna be when they're gonna kick you out. The use of dark here just adds to that feeling of pure horror and dread, especially when the pursuers get added into the mix. Your visibility is so limited here, and feels you leaving defenseless against whatever is in the dark. Even when these locations may feel completely normal if there was just more light to them. Once you get past the initial horror and aren't in danger, these areas really are just magical. There is a sort of peace to how quiet these areas are, and the river swamp look is just so nice compared to the broken down and dead look of the regular world. Areas like the Starlit Cove especially are just absolutely beautiful once you turn on a few lights. It's just the right mix of darkness and also a feeling of hominess to make it feel sometimes like it isn't dangerous anymore, and it's just a home where everyone's asleep. But those feelings of peace usually don't last long. Everything is completed with the wonderful score still made by Andrew Prowlow. They once again create an absolutely amazing OST that manages to capture so many emotions. One thing that stands out is how different it manages to feel from Outer Wilds' original score. Just like how the Nomai had their own sound compared to the Hearthians, so does the Stranger and everything inside it. The OST fuses the rustic sound with the signature singing / theremin of the Stranger, and some more electronic sounding music, along with throwing in melodies unique to the Stranger to tie everything together. The overall sound is honestly improved from the initial OST, and it just conveys so many different feelings, from the adventurous and wonderful feeling of going down the river, to its somber end with their tracks, to the slow understanding of the Stranger's fate from the slides with tracks like The First Seekers and The Premonition, to the horror of the simulation with the Eternal Halls and Elegy of the Rings, and to the emotional hard hitters of the ending with Sound of Water and Echoes of the Eye. Each track is just really nice to listen to on its own. Well, maybe except stuff like Eternal Halls and Dark Passage. And I will likely listen to those a lot, just like I did for the original OST. But a good environment isn't good for anything if there's nothing to do in it. So, let's discuss how this DLC builds upon Outer Wilds gameplay. The original Outer Wilds is one of the best exploration experiences ever. The game sets up a huge sandbox for you to play in, and leaves you to dig for the pieces and figure out what you need to do with them. Puzzles were expertly designed to challenge you, and ask you to put together pieces of the mystery going on. They managed to work despite nothing ever changing between loops. Anything can be done on your first loop, including beating the game. You go at your own pace and play your own way, and it's what made Outer Wilds so special. The DLC does not disappoint in terms of giving us more of the exploration we all loved, but it also gives us more than we may have bargained for. As stated before, the Stranger is an amazing new location to play around in, both for just how interesting it is in terms of design, but also with the unique gimmicks it brings along. One of my fears going into this DLC was that the time loop wouldn't play much of a role due to the small scale. But oh boy did they prove me wrong. The river is such a different way to explore this location. Rafting around different locations as you learn the routes to get to certain places and get there faster. It has such a wonderful feeling to it, especially once combined with the music. I really can't do it justice with words. And there is a reason you'll want to learn to control it and go faster. Because like I said, the time loop is still here with the main mechanic of the dam. Much like Brittle Hollow, it'll break down slowly, and eventually the water will come through and absolutely destroy certain locations. They managed to pull the full potential from this, and it keeps that feeling that the time loop does still matter here. Not to mention the dynamic moments that this can bring, such as the dam breaking while you're on it, which did happen to me. And exploring the mysteries of the Stranger using these new things feels just as great as ever, as you slowly piece together both what happened to them and what you need to do now. The main Stranger has plenty of simple puzzles for you to piece together, and just like the main game, these are not locked behind anything except your own knowledge. One small thing I love is how so many puzzles and later gameplay focus on light. Not only does it set up the later stealth segments perfectly, but it explores this thing Outer Wilds never really used for puzzles, and stretches it to its full potential. Whether it be in the basic mechanics of using rafts and doors, to unlocking some of the big pieces of a puzzle, it all just adds to that feeling of things being different that I mentioned before. And speaking of things being different, let's discuss the simulation again. This place takes Outer Wilds' main gameplay and turns it on its head in all the right ways. These areas are a lot more limited than the usual freedom of Outer Wilds. You get stripped of your spacesuit and are only left with a lantern to navigate these segments and solve puzzles. You're forced to play by the game's rules now in order to get through these segments. I can't describe how utterly helpless these sections make you feel. Not just with how little you can see, but how all that movement your spacesuit gave you that you took for granted is just ripped away. Now areas that would be easy to explore with a flashlight and jetpack are horrifying nightmares you can't wake up from. And this only gets worse as you explore more of them, and eventually reaches the point you have to deal with the completely new type of gameplay this DLC brings. The Pursuers. Although they're gone from the real world, the Strangers still roam their simulation, and aren't exactly happy about something new entering their space. They roam around certain parts of the simulation, carrying lanterns as they search for you. These guys bring something to Outer Wilds I would have not expected. Stealth. Turns out there's a reason why your lantern has a control for concealing the light, as they sort of work as an opposite to the anglerfish. While they won't hear you walking about, they can see your light very well, and if they see even a speck of light, then they're gonna investigate further. And my goodness, they are utterly ruthless with how hard they will look for your trail. You have to hide in pure darkness to avoid them. And my god, being left in pitch black as you hide behind something, praying they won't come and find you, is the most horrifying thing ever. I will cut the praise a bit, as while it's very good for the horror, the stealth itself could be better. The Strangers are just really hard to predict and understand at first. Not to mention that not seeing them sometimes can be really unfair. These sections can be brutal to get through if you don't know exactly what you're doing. Not to mention that they can be way more intense than anything in Outer Wilds was, and maybe too much for some like me. But the game actually allows for solutions to both of these problems. The first is the reduced frights mode, which along with reducing some of the noise they make, also makes it so you can both run away from them easier, and also makes it so they won't search for you if you keep your light off, which makes these sections so much easier. The second is what I find a lot more fun, and keeps with the ideals of Outer Wilds. For most of these areas, being clever can save you from these sections. This can vary in how you can do it, but you won't really need to do heavy stealth for all but half an area, although I'm not sure if that half skip was intended. The game will reward you for thinking outside the box, whether it be setting up things beforehand, or using some techniques you learn, which we'll discuss now as we get into the puzzles. I already love the exploration puzzles in the main Stranger, but the puzzles within the simulation are absolutely a highlight of the DLC for me, with just how creative they get. Each time you clear a stealth section, you're rewarded with both more story and your way to clear a seal on the final vault, through a technique to break the simulation. These are just so clever. Whether you take advantage of what seemed to be like a really weird loading zone for a game like this, which turns out to be an in-universe one to break the loading, take away your stimulus from the outside world through death, or remove the graphics and see the simulation for what it really is. Each of these is just wonderful to figure out and then implement to solve the puzzles in front of you. They capture a certain magic similar to learning the quantum rules in the base game. While it isn't perfect in the more horror gameplay, Echoes of the Eye really does deliver on not only giving us more of what we wanted, but also giving something new and exciting for us. And just like in the base game, all of this is done both with and to discover the mysteries of what's going on. So, let's delve into how it tells the story this time. Story is one of the aspects I was most skeptical about with this DLC. Outer Wilds is already just such a complete story on its own. It manages to work so perfectly with the gameplay as you slowly pick up storylines and characters, and as you explore, they slowly begin to connect and piece together to form a grand narrative. Whether you look at the story of one individual Nomai like Pokey, with their time with their mentor and eventual fear of failure, or the grand tragedy of the curious Nomai who couldn't reach their dream before the end, or even how you and your friendly travelers fit into everything. Everything is just so filled with feeling and hits so hard. All of these elements weave together to tell an emotional story about tragedy, learning, curiosity, despair, and picking up the torch that the Nomai left behind to create a new beginning. It already just so finely connected that I didn't think you could just go in and add something and then be like, oh, well, it was there the whole time, and have that land at all. But that's exactly what this DLC story does, and somehow it manages to just work. The story of the stranger feels like something that was always here. Just a forgotten piece of the puzzle that answers one or two leftover questions for us. But before we delve into what it tells, I want to discuss how it tells it, because it's really interesting. Once again, going with the theme of this DLC going the opposite way that the base game did, the story of the stranger is told in a completely new way. While in the base game everything is told through only text you find, the stranger goes the opposite way, as you can't translate the language the strangers use. Instead, you have to rely on another way they told their information and history, which is through their slides. These will tell you their history and also hints of the various puzzles, only through the visuals you see. It's just so interesting how it keeps the element of deciphering the story bits you do find, but now in a new, unique way, as you figure out what's trying to be told with these pictures, as it does bring new challenges to the mystery. While you do get a better idea of the what and also the timeline here, other aspects will escape you. You don't know any of the people by name like you did the Nomai, and you also don't get all the specifics either. You'll only get the broad strokes now with them. You're left with only theories as to the specifics, and this is also due to the fact that they burn their slides. Bits of info will be locked off until you find the Forbidden Archives, which leads to excellent moments where you get those key bits of info, and finally everything begins to make sense. So, let's tell the broad strokes of The Stranger and why it hits so hard. The people of The Stranger were the first to hear the Eye's signal. They found interest in the Eye's mysteries just like the Nomai did, and they were willing to give everything also like them. They destroyed their homeworld to build a great craft to reach it, a worthy sacrifice for a worthy goal to them. But when they finally reached it, they weren't happy to have their goals achieved. They were horrified. They couldn't comprehend the Eye's purpose to wipe away everything for a new beginning. To them, they had given everything, only to find a destroyer of worlds. They were enraged and felt betrayed by the Eye that had stolen their home planet from them. Not only did they burn the building they dedicated to the Eye, but they did something that set up everything. They hid the Eye away. They blocked the signal from reaching anything, so that no one would meet the same fate as them, or worse, trigger the end of everything. And this reveal is so perfect. It perfectly links the Stranger's story into the main game by expertly answering the one question left that no one had thought about. Why did the Eye stop transmitting? It was so glossed over in the original game as just the nature of the Eye, but now it takes on a whole new answer, as it adds an element of real tragedy to both the Nomai's state of not being able to keep tracking it, and to the universe's lost knowledge as a whole. This will only get more amazing and tragic as we move into the ending. But with the Eye gone, they still had no home. It was gone. So instead, they used their knowledge of technology to craft something incredible. A full simulation of their old home. A place to retreat into happy memories. Even more incredible is that it even keeps a dead person alive in the simulation. They could live in their happy memories forever. And this is where they lie now, forever in slumber, as they waste away in their old memories. They hid the greatest knowledge in the universe out of fear, then hid away in that same fear. Fear is the central theme to their story. While the Nomai and Hearthians embrace the unknown with curiosity, the Strangers hide away from it out of fear. They are a perfect inversion of the Nomai we know. This species held some of the most incredible technology we've seen. Stuff that could have changed everything and made for a better future if they colonized the system, or even met the Nomai. But instead, they chose to waste away in their old memories, and hide from the Eye and the nature of the universe. They refuse to accept the end of things. They will not let things start anew. They are the antithesis to what Outer Wilds is, and yet you can understand their fear and despair, as misguided as it may be. The Stranger is a tragic story, and it will only grow more tragic as we delve down to finally see what else they hid in that vault. Let's quickly discuss the ending to Echoes of the Eye. As horrifying as the stranger is, it does at least give you an end goal to work towards. You will consistently see this vault and how the inhabitants did everything in their power to lock it up and hide it away. 3 seals along with sinking it below the water just to be safe. You know from the second you see it, something big is in there. You slowly begin to pick up clues for how to open this thing up, as you find an underground cove in the simulation, where the fire posts keeping the vault sealed lie. All that you need now is the codes, and a crack in the vault leads you to a location where you think they might have the codes, but the inhabitants went through every measure to make sure no one opens that vault, as every code is burned except one. This leads to a reveal that adds on to the pure despair of the stranger's story, as you find that the reason there's so few slides is that they chose to abandon the real world by burning almost all of their slides and transferring them to the simulation. They would rather be completely forgotten than face the universe. But thankfully here also lies clues for where to go next. This leads to you exploring the darkest parts of the simulation and dealing with more pursuers to reach the Forbidden Archives, where all those slides were stored. Here, you learn both the hidden bits of the story, such as their home being destroyed and the eye being hidden, and you also find what you think is going to be the code to open the vault, but in each one, they're burnt. Even here, they do not want anyone opening the vault. But no matter what they do, your wish to learn and face the universe overcomes it, as you manage to use the various glitches in their simulation to bypass the need for codes. And eventually, you get the vault opened up, even if you have to die to do it. And here, you enter through the dark corridors and head down to find what you may not have expected. You find a stranger with a broken horn and they don't attack you. This was a big surprise when I found them, and my goodness did it make for one final moment of terror before it turned into the biggest relief. Instead, you have a moment to interact with the prisoner. Just like Solanum, you can't speak with them as they don't understand your language. But, just like Solanum as well, they still manage to make a connection with you, just like the rest of their kind did. They offer to show you their story through the memory staffs you see, and this turns out to be the unburnt version of the final slide you never found, that explains the vault. After the simulation had been built and most had retreated into it, the prisoner woke themselves up and headed out of the room. They went for the controls to the device that blocked the eye's signal. They defied their own kind and allowed the eye signal to go out. But they didn't get away with this, as the others woke up as well and surrounded them. The eye's signal was blocked again, and they went the extra step to burn the controls so no one could ever free the signal again. And as for the prisoner, their act didn't go unpunished, as they were locked inside the vault to be trapped both in the waking world and the simulation. They were lowered into the water to be forgotten forever. And in this moment, they seemed to have failed. They had betrayed their kind. They had thrown away their life and beyond now. And it was all for nothing, as now no one could ever find the eye again. And after telling their story, they offer the staff over to you, and you get a chance to tell them your story. You show them the rippling effect of their action. Even though their own kind chose to waste away in their simulation until their death, their action mattered, even though the signal was only on for a few moments. That single fading signal rippled out and was caught by the Nomai vessel. The prisoner's signal is the one they caught, and explains why the signal was fading and they never heard it again. In a rush, they warp to it, and just like we already know, they end up in dark bramble and send out their escape pods. But even with their loss, they still build towards the eye of the universe. But they get unlucky, as the interloper enters the system and kills them all in an instant. But this isn't the end. As their civilization crumbles away and they turn to only bone, eventually the Hearthians arrive with Feldspar, who investigates the ruins and finds the slab that is brought back to the museum. We then see your character as a child enters in with Hal, viewing the Nomai writing which inspires them to join the space program and begin the journey that leads to everything we've experienced. All of this is accompanied by the track Echoes of the Eye, which brings together elements of so many songs from the original score to make for a final send-off to the story of Outer Wilds. And just, God, it's so beautiful and powerful. And after seeing the rippling effects of their single action, what may have seemed like an utter waste at first, the prisoner lets out a howl filled with so many emotions. Their sorrow over the loss of their people, their happiness that others didn't fall to the fear like their kind did, the sadness that they can never see what was built up, the relief that their action wasn't in vain. It's filled with so much emotion and perfectly caps off this DLC as they head back up to the surface with their vision staff. When you come up after them, they leave their staff on the shore with a single small slide on it, showing the two of you boarding a ship on their own home and going into the sunset. As if they're saying, "I'm glad I met you. I wish I could have shown you what I loved." And with them nowhere in sight, you know what they did. All you can do is follow and enter the water to reset the loop. Although that's the end of the main DLC, there's still more if you journey back to the Eye to finally bring a total end to everything. Most of the journey is the same as before, and I talked about it better than I ever could in my old video. But when you reach the campfire with Esker and Rebek, there's now a new signal out there. The familiar singing of the stranger. If you head there, you remember the tree from those Riverlands with a grave by it. Nearby is a building with a slide control as you go through, and the grave in front of you is slowly dug. Upon reaching the end of the slides, you can only jump into the grave. Down here are pictures of the strangers, the Nomai, and Hearthians, with candles by each of them. And you must accept the end of all things as you blow out each candle and they disappear from the photos. Once you've let go of everything, the door opens, and with one final scare as we blow out a candle on ourselves, we get the instrument of the strangers, and the prisoner appears close to the fire. Unlike the others, you must actually speak with them, as much like their kind, fear paralyzes them, as they're worried that because of their kind's history with the Eye, and all the horrible things with it, they may bring something awful to the next universe. They ask if you wish to remember them despite everything their kind did. You can choose to forget them, which is awful and you are my friend if you do, or you can let them join you at the fire. One final time, you all play for an encore, now with a new instrument to the mix, as the prisoner's theremin brings the sorrow of their tale to the fire, and yet also the joy and relief that they could be the cause for all of this. And then, you collapse the new universe again, and after 14.3 billion years, you see what they brought to the table, as now their joyful memories of the Riverlands manifest, and their kind finds new forms in the shadows. And with that, with nothing left to explore or see, let's say goodbye to Outer Wilds. Outer Wilds is one of my favorite games of all time, and this DLC only cements its status further by making this experience more whole in ways I never could have expected. It plays on mechanics that either weren't looked upon much in the original, or that are brand new to the experience. This DLC fits perfectly into the base game by answering the question no one was asking, that ends up putting everything into perspective. The Stranger is a story I never knew I wanted to hear, and yet it ends up being so beautiful and tragic. It's such a genius inversion of the Nomai, and makes for a great final tale. It may have been a scarier one than we may have expected, but it was still beautiful as ever. From what I know, this is the only DLC Outer Wilds will get, so sadly, this is the last we'll see of our lovely solar system camping. But that's not the end for Mobius Digital, as the studio still seems to be together. Now, we can only wait and see what they have in store for us in the future. It may not be the same as Outer Wilds, but I have faith it will be something with just as much love and passion poured into it. But this is still goodbye to the Outer Wilds, and it was the perfect send-off. That's all for now. See you all in the next video, wherever that takes us.